Hi.
Hi.
So, as has been mentioned, these talks originated out of our Burning Man experience. Excuse me. And initially, I was going to do my presentation on Albert Hofmann and Alex Gray and Alexander Shulgin and their first LSD experiences and first MDMA experiences, and show like their transit correlations as to when they had their first experiences and what the archetypal significance was. But I felt like it was maybe a little too much for the Burning Man audience, and just kind of sinking in with the rite of passage theme with Burning Man itself and kind of just meditating on it, I felt like it was better to do the big picture kind of analysis of is it possible that humanity as a collective is going through a rite of passage. And so I decided to change the talk, and this is somewhat what came out of that. It's interesting. How many of you are familiar with the Eleusinian mystery rites? Okay, pretty good number. Just to clarify, the Eleusinian mystery rites were an ancient mystery school that actually went on from as early as 1600 BC all the way through 300 AD, so it was an extremely long period of time that this ritual was taking place. It took place in the town of Eleusis, which is like 60 miles from Athens, and in ancient Greece, it was allowed for every Athenian citizen or every Greek citizen to participate in the Eleusinian mystery rites unless you had blood on your hands. So if you had been convicted of murder or accused of murder, you weren't allowed to participate. But everyone else was allowed to participate, even slaves. If you could speak Greek, you were allowed to participate. So it was a widespread cultural initiation ritual that we really don't know how much of an effect that experience had on the collective psyche of the Greek mind. It seems as though, and my hunch is that it had a pretty profound effect on it. And it does seem, though, as though Plato had a vision of some deeply transcendent form that allowed him insight into the nature of the archetypes and into many other things. If we kind of go to the beginning, astrology and astronomy were actually a single science. It's probably the first science. It's our attempt to understand where we are in relationship to the world and to the cosmos. And it's also very likely that our study of the movements of the moon and of the sun and the planets is actually what taught us to count. The first etchings, systematic etchings, are like dated at 25,000 years ago, and they're cycles of the moon. So like it seems as though just our trying to understand that relationship is what allowed us to gain a numeric system and to divide the day into 2, the seasons into 4, the months into 13, because there's actually 13 months, 28-day months in a year. So it's very likely that this original study is what in large measure gave us the capacity to learn to count. And it's interesting, Plato, above all, for him, above all the other ideas and forms, archetypal forms, mathematics was his preeminent philosophy or understanding or sense of the archetypes. It was like the superior kind of form that was influencing all of reality and experience as we know it. Let's see. So for Plato, the heavens were recognized as eternally unchanging and perfect. They were an image, like Matt was mentioning. It was an eternal, moving image of the divine. So the stars weren't like gases, and the planets aren't rocks and dust and stuff. They're literally images of the divine itself, and that it's a source of the world order. Let's see. Some things that Plato mentions about that that are really important, it seems. while earthly life was marked by change and changes in the weather and death, being born, coming into existence, and passing away, the stars were eternal and unchanging. They were perfect in their symmetry and their harmony, and this is what, on some measure, seemed to give Plato the conviction that they were divine. And in some level, it's like Plato equated order with divinity. With almost order for him was like a monotheistic principle. Even though he's living in a polytheistic pantheon, he has this kind of central ordering idea that on some level can be seen as a monotheistic thought. And this is what Rick from Passion of the Western Mind, sorry, I'm going to go back. I really meant to thank Matt and Becca for the opportunity to be with you today and to speak. So sorry, I glanced over that. And the fact that the majority of what I'm discussing here today is influenced highly by the work of Richard Tarnas. The majority of this is just a synthesis on some level of what he's done. So back to where I was. Rick, in Passion, he describing kind of Plato's understanding, he says, the human mind and the universe are ordered according to the same archetypal structures or essences, because of which, and only because of which, true understanding of things is possible for human intelligence. So what he's saying is that the archetypal dimension of reality that informs the cosmos is also the same archetypal reality that informs our consciousness and our intelligence, and that there's a connection between the two, that the human mind has a special relationship to the nous, or to the cosmic mind, or the cosmic intelligence. And let's see, there's one other thing I wanted to say. Two things here. So for Plato, his understanding of a circle or a triangle or numbers and geometry, it wasn't that they were projections of human cognition onto the world, or were they necessarily just coming from the world itself. The circle, the triangle, numbers, geometry, they're archetypes. They transcend the world, they transcend the human experience, but they're informing both. So this is part of his understanding. And one really important thing I think that kind of leads to our time today is, again, this is Rick on Plato, says that Plato said, by devoting oneself to the things divine, the philosopher could awaken divinity within himself and bring his own life into intelligent harmony with the celestial order. So it's like Matt also mentioned that he elevated astronomy as kind of the highest geometry and which was what astronomy truly is. Right, was like the highest kind of thing you could aspire to understand. Did you want to add something to that? No. So it seems as though that premise, in large measure, is what we're doing today. But so to the main point with Plato is what he recognized was that, and he put forth the problem of the planets. Planet in Greek means wanderer. So against the fixed, eternal kind of perfection of the stars, which did not change, their relationship to each other does not change. Every night they come over the same way, and at the same time of year you'll see exactly the same stars in exactly the same order, century after century. But if you're watching the planets wander. They have erratic motion. They speed up, they slow down, they get brighter, they get dimmer. There's an erratic quality to them. They're not perfect, eternal, and unchanging in the way that the rest of the stars were seen to be. And for Plato, this erratic or seemingly wandering motion was not erratic. He had such a deep conviction that the entire universe was saturated with divinity, that if the wandering motion was genuinely a wandering motion and erratic, that in his mind the entire universe should be absurd. because he felt like there was an ordering principle that governed all of it. And so he put forth the problem of the planets to the astronomer, astrologer, philosophers, who were actually one person for Plato. They were all kind of the same entity, to save the phenomena, to try and understand, to gain the accurate mathematics behind why the planets seem to have this wandering motion. And this took 2,000 years. 2,000 years of study by astronomers through the Western tradition, even in Arabia, when they took over a lot of our knowledge and held it for a while. No one was able to recognize the reason why the planets wandered, and it ultimately was because their idea was the Earth was the fixed center of everything, and that was incorrect. So it took the Copernican revolution to get the accurate math to recognize that the Earth was not the center in order to get the accurate motions of the planets. So this is a crucial evolution in the evolution of human consciousness. And what it does, it's so profound actually. What happens is that because it was human reason, that it solved a mystery that no other perspective had ever been able to solve. Any religious perspective, all the previous sciences and alchemy, nothing could actually, or nothing had rendered the accurate representation of the universe and where we were in it. So human reason, because it had eclipsed all previous modes of knowledge, basically became hubristic. It became inflated. There's a massive inflation of selfhood, and the movement towards autonomous selfhood is it's hyper differentiated at the Copernican revolution. It had been taking place since we first took up tool and had an objective kind of relationship to the Earth. But in the early in antiquity, we saw ourselves as embedded and participating in nature. We were a part of the cosmos. I mean, if you go back really early, it's like the gods were speaking through us. It's like we didn't even have a sense of autonomy and selfhood. It was like the words, thoughts we heard in our mind were the divine speaking through us. But then we're gradually forging autonomy, we're gradually forging selfhood, and then the Copernican revolution is the kind of watershed of that differentiation, where this is where Descartes comes in and says, I think, therefore I am, and everything we know prior to that we have to basically throw out, because it's based on a primitive understanding of Earth being in the center of the universe, and it's lacking all of these empirical scientific ways of knowing that we are gaining in the Renaissance after the Copernican revolution. So is this making sense so far? Yeah. 5 minutes, okay, great. So the major things that come out of the Copernican revolution are the subject-object division, where before there was a connectivity between human experience and nature, whereas now nature is seen as an object, and it's for utilitarian kind of control and analysis of the human subject. And we also, we kind of absorbed all of the knowledge that we previously saw in the universe, in the heavens, in nature, and kind of placed it inside the head. The ego had kind of inflated itself to see itself superior to all of those things, and therefore suppressed it into its unconscious. And this is honestly where we developed such a deep, intense personal unconscious, is because we took that relationship with the unconscious out of our relationship to the other and placed it inside. And this is where, there's a couple of things that I'm going to skip over because it's such a short thing, but it's Newton, Kant, Darwin, and Nietzsche. And it's a series of their philosophies that just basically destroy the metaphysical world after Copernicus. I won't go into the details of that, but because what happens is because we've moved to such a disenchanted cosmos, where prior it was enchanted with meaning, there was meaning in the cosmos, meaning in ourselves, because we objectified that and placed it all in here. Jung has a quote that is really relevant, where he says, let's see, I don't want to mess it up. Since the stars have fallen from heaven and our highest symbols have paled, a secret life holds sway in the unconscious. That is why we have a psychology today, and why we speak of the unconscious. So what he's saying basically is that the need, the necessity to develop depth psychology came out of the forging of the autonomous self, out of the Copernican revolution and the suppression of all of the previous engagement with an enchanted universe and suppressing it all into ourselves. Another way of thinking of this is Hillman has a quote. He says, the gods have become our diseases. You know, it's like the gods are our pathologies. It's like we're living with them inside of us, and we don't have like a good reference for why and what and timing and why they're coming out at certain times. Yet, we're almost there. Okay, so this is the end. Basically, okay, yeah. So what's really crucial in the next period of time is actually the discovery of the 3 outer planets. Prior to the Copernican revolution and all of the ancient astrology, the last planet you can see with the naked eye is Saturn. So you can see all the planets up to Saturn, but you can't see Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto. So those 3 planets, which are crucial, they're extremely rich in their archetypal nature, were unknown to the ancients, and their astrology was limited in many ways, not only because of that, but because it was Earth-centered in its understanding of the math. So because we recognized the accurate math, discovered the 3 outer planets, and are beginning to integrate their meanings, it deeply expanded the cartography or the pantheon of the astrological perspective. And what Rick did, which is really amazing and crucial to this whole thing, is that it's interesting because it was in the lineage of the depth psychological tradition, Freud, Jung, which Jung brings in synchronicity, starts opening up this, the fact that, hey, the cosmos is saturated with meaning and it's trying to communicate to us. And then Groff doing, his extremely deep psychological work with the aid of LSD and non-ordinary states of consciousness research. It was their research together that led them to discover astrology. They were striving to gain insight into what type of an experience someone would have in any non-ordinary state of consciousness experience, whereas all the tests that they had prior to that failed miserably to give any idea or qualitatively of what type of an experience an individual would go through under any non-ordinary state experience. So it's interesting to me that Plato sees the cosmos as divine and saturated with meaning, but he also recognized it as the world soul, like the anima mundi, which I don't think he had the term for. I think that's Latin. I think it comes after. I'm not sure, but the world soul. He has the idea that it is soul and that the human soul has a special relationship to it. And what's fascinating, this is where I'll close, I think, is with a quote from Bruno Schultz. And he says, "So it comes to pass that when we pursue an inquiry beyond a certain depth, we step out of the field of psychological categories and enter the sphere of the ultimate mysteries of life. To the floorboards of the soul to which we try to penetrate, fan open and reveal the starry firmament." Do you want me to read it again real quick? You got it. One more time. "So it comes to pass, when we pursue an inquiry beyond a certain depth, we step out of the field of psychological categories and enter into the sphere of the ultimate mysteries of life. The floorboards of the soul to which we try to penetrate, fan open, and reveal the starry firmament." And to me, this is really profound because I feel like it's exactly that process that Rick and the depth psychological tradition was doing, and that Stan and Rick were doing, is trying to penetrate the floorboards of the soul, the depth of the soul of who we are. And lo and behold, what did they discover in their research was the astrological. And what it turns out to be indicating is that the depth of our psyche, the depth of our soul, is commensurate with the planets, with the movements of the heavens, that we are not separate from them, that the depth of our interiority is commensurate and relational with the movements of the heavens. And so what astrology seems to be indicating is because we've kind of forged a new autonomous selfhood out of modernity, that we are now in a position to develop a new relationship to the astrological perspective that wasn't possible when we were when the Earth was the center and we weren't autonomous creative individuals in the same specific way that we are now. I mean, on some level, the last 500 years, we had to disengage from the pre-given meanings. It's like astrology was, but it was very fatalistic. It was like, this is your chart, this is what's going to happen to you. It was very dogmatic and deterministic in the same way that medieval philosophy kind of was, or whatever. Or in the Vedic system, it's much more fatalistic because they have the caste system. They have all these determined factors in their society, but we live in an open universe in many ways, and with the ascendant of democracy. Sorry, I'm going way over my time now. I wanted to close though with what I just said. So I'll leave it there, and I'm sure there'll be good discussions afterwards. So, thank you.